The room was smaller than he expected. A single lamp on the desk. The windows facing 7th Avenue were tall but gray with city dust. Jackson Browne sat on a folding chair near the door, his hands resting on his knees. He was 21 years old. His hair was long and brown and uncombed. He wore a cotton shirt that hung loose over his ribs. He did not look like someone who belonged in that building. He did not feel like it either. Across from him, a man in a dark blazer shuffled papers on the desk. The man's name was Grossman. Jackson had heard the name before. Everyone had. Albert Grossman, manager of Bob Dylan, manager of Janis Joplin, manager of half the names that mattered. Grossman's face was round and soft, but his eyes were not. He did not smile. He did not make small talk. He slid a contract across the desk and said, "Sign it." Jackson leaned forward. The paper was crisp and white and covered with words he did not fully understand. The typeface was small, the clauses were numbered. At the top, in bold letters, it said Bearsville Records. That was Grossman's label. Dylan had recorded there. The band had recorded there. It was not a major label, but it was close enough. It was real. It was more real than anything Jackson had signed before. He did not have a lawyer. He did not have a manager. He had a few songs he had written in motel rooms and on borrowed couches. He had a voice that people said was gentle. He had a name that no one knew yet. He had rent due in 3 weeks. He had a belief that music could mean something, that it could say something true, that it could reach someone in the dark and make them feel less alone. He believed that. He believed it so hard it hurt. Grossman lit a cigarette. The smoke rose slowly. He did not ask if Jackson understood the terms. He did not ask if Jackson needed time. He just waited. The room was quiet except for the hum of the radiator and the muted sound of traffic below. Jackson picked up the pen. It was heavy. Heavier than it should have been. He held it over the signature line. His hand did not shake, but it did not move either. He thought about the songs. He thought about the lines he had written late at night when he could not sleep. He thought about the way a melody could hold a person's grief, could hold their hope, could hold both at once. He thought about what it would mean to have someone believe in that, to have a label, to have a chance. He signed. Grossman nodded once. He took the contract and placed it in a folder. He stood up. He shook Jackson's hand. The handshake was firm but brief. He said, "You'll hear from us." Then he walked out of the room. Jackson sat there for a moment longer. The lamp buzzed faintly. He could hear voices in the hall, phones ringing somewhere down the corridor. He stood up slowly. He left the building and walked out into the afternoon light. The air was cold. The sky was flat and pale. He walked downtown with his hands in his pockets. He did not feel relief. He did not feel joy. He felt something closer to fear. The streets of Manhattan moved around him like a current. People pushed past. Horns blared. A vendor on the corner sold pretzels from a cart that smelled like salt and steam. Jackson walked without seeing any of it. His mind was back in that room, back at the desk, back at the moment the pen touched paper. He had come to New York 3 months earlier. He had driven across the country in a car that barely ran. The engine rattled. The heater did not work. He had slept in the back seat in rest stops and parking lots. He had eaten from vending machines. He had done it because he believed that New York was where music happened, where songs became real, where unknowns became names. But New York had been harder than he thought. The city did not care about belief. It did not care about dreams. It moved fast and it moved cold. He had played a dozen open mic nights. He had passed his demo tape to anyone who would take it. Most did not. Most looked through him like he was invisible. A few listened. Fewer cared. One person had called him back. That person worked for Grossman. By the time he reached his apartment, the fear had settled into his chest like a weight. He sat on the edge of his bed. The room was narrow and dim. The walls were thin. He could hear the couple next door arguing. He could hear a radio playing somewhere above him. He thought about the contract. He thought about the words he had not read carefully. He thought about the pen in his hand and the way Grossman had watched him sign. He stood up. He went to the kitchen and poured himself water from the tap. He drank it standing at the sink. The water was metallic and lukewarm. He set the glass down and stared out the small window above the stove. The fire escape outside was rusted. A pigeon sat on the railing, still and gray. Jackson thought about the first time he had played a song for someone who mattered. It was in a coffee house in Los Angeles. The room had been full of cigarette smoke and murmured conversation. He had sat on a stool with his guitar and played a song called These Days. The room had gone quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from politeness, the kind that comes from listening. When he finished, a woman in the back row had wiped her eyes. She had not clapped. She had just sat there looking at him, and then she had left. He had not known what it meant, but it had meant something. He thought about that now. He thought about what it would mean to lose that, to sign it away, to let someone else decide what his songs should sound like, where they should go, who should hear them. He thought about the clause in the contract that gave Grossman control over the recordings, over the production, over the image, over the sound. He thought about the way Grossman had looked at him, like he was a product, like he was a thing that could be shaped and sold. Jackson walked back to the bedroom. He sat down at the small wooden table by the window. It was scarred and uneven. A candle sat in the center, half melted. He pulled out a notebook. The pages were filled with lyrics, half-finished verses, lines that did not yet have melodies. He flipped through them slowly. Each page was a piece of him. Each line was something he had felt deeply enough to write down. He stopped at a page near the middle. The song was called Song for Adam. He had written it after a friend died, a friend who had jumped from a building in downtown Los Angeles. Jackson had not known what to say at the funeral. He had not known how to hold the grief, so he had written the song instead. It was quiet and sad and true. It did not try to explain the loss. It just sat with it. It just let the sadness exist. He thought about what would happen if someone else controlled that song. If someone wanted to make it brighter. If someone wanted to add strings or drums or a chorus that made it easier to hear. If someone wanted to turn it into something it was not. He thought about the friend who had died. He thought about the promise he had made to himself to never lie in a song, to never fake an emotion, to never pretend he felt something he did not. He closed the notebook. He knew what he had to do. Jackson did not sleep that night. He lay on his back with his eyes open. The ceiling was stained with water damage. The street light outside cast shadows that moved when cars passed. He thought about Dylan. He thought about how Dylan had walked away from folk music when everyone told him not to, how he had gone electric at Newport and the crowd had booed him, how he had not cared, how he had done it anyway because it was true to him. Jackson did not know if he had that kind of courage. He did not know if he had the right to walk away from something he had just signed. But he knew something was wrong. He knew it in his gut. He knew it in the way his chest felt tight and his hands felt cold. He knew it in the way the contract had felt when he held it, like a door closing. By morning, he had made his decision. He put on the same shirt he had worn the day before. He washed his face in the sink. The water was cold. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror above the basin. His eyes were tired. His face was pale. He looked like someone who had not slept. He looked like someone who was about to make a mistake or the smartest decision of his life. He did not know which. He walked back to the building on 7th Avenue. The sky was overcast. The streets were crowded with people walking fast, heads down, coats pulled tight. He took the elevator up. His heart was pounding. His mouth was dry. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. He stepped into the hallway. The carpet was worn. The walls were beige. The air smelled like coffee and old cigarettes. Grossman's office was at the end of the hall. The door was half open. Jackson could hear voices inside. He stood outside for a moment, listening. Grossman was on the phone. His voice was low and steady. He was talking about money, about percentages, about deals. Jackson waited. He did not knock. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, breathing slowly. When Grossman finished the call, Jackson stepped inside. Grossman looked up from his desk. His face showed nothing. No surprise, no irritation, just a blank, neutral stare. He said, "What is it?" Jackson's voice was steady but quiet. He said, "I can't do this." Grossman did not react. He just sat there, arms crossed, waiting. Jackson said, "I need the contract back. I need to tear it up." Grossman's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not raise his voice. He did not move. He said, "You signed it." Jackson nodded. He said, "I know, but I made a mistake." Grossman let out a long breath through his nose. He looked at Jackson like he was looking at a child who did not understand how the world worked. He said, "You don't just walk away from a contract. That's not how this works." Jackson said, "I'm not trying to walk away from music. I'm trying to walk toward it, the right way." Grossman leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. He said, "The right way? What does that even mean? You think there's a right way to do this? You think anyone cares about your vision, your purity? This is business. You make records. You sell them. You make money. That's it." Jackson said, "That's not it for me." Grossman shook his head. He said, "You're a kid. You don't know what you're talking about. You think you're going to get a better deal somewhere else? You think Columbia or Elektra's going to care about you? You're nobody. You're a kid with a guitar. I'm giving you a shot. I'm putting my name behind you. And you're walking away because of what? Because you want control? Because you think you know better?" Jackson looked at him. He did not look away. He said, "I don't know if I know better, but I know what feels wrong, and this feels wrong." Grossman stood up. He was not a tall man, but he seemed larger in that moment. He walked around the desk and stood a few feet from Jackson. He said, "You know what's wrong? Being broke. Being unknown. Playing to empty rooms for the rest of your life. That's what's wrong. I've seen 100 kids like you. Talented, idealistic, stupid. Most of them end up nowhere. They end up teaching guitar lessons or playing weddings because they were too proud to take the help when it was offered." Jackson said, "Maybe, but at least they'll still have their songs." Grossman stared at him. The room was silent. The hum of the city outside seemed distant. The office felt small and airless. Grossman's jaw tightened. He said, "You really want to do this?" Jackson said, "Yes." Grossman turned and walked back to his desk. He opened a drawer and pulled out the folder. He opened it slowly, deliberately. He took out the contract and held it up. He looked at Jackson one more time. His face was unreadable. Then he tore the contract in half. The sound was sharp and clean. He tore it again and again. He dropped the pieces into the wastebasket beside the desk. He said, "Get out." Jackson did not say anything. He turned and walked out of the office. He walked down the hall. He took the elevator down. The ride felt longer than it had before. The doors opened and he stepped out onto the street. The air was cold and damp. The sky was still gray. He walked south for a long time. He did not know where he was going. He just walked. He felt lighter. He felt terrified. He felt both at once. He passed a newsstand. The headlines were about Vietnam, about protests, about a country tearing itself apart. He passed a diner. The windows were fogged. Inside, people sat alone at the counter, eating eggs and drinking coffee. He passed a record store. The window display had albums by the Beatles and Joni Mitchell and Leonard Cohen. He stopped and looked at them. He wondered if his face would ever be in a window like that. He wondered if it mattered. He kept walking. He walked until his feet hurt. He walked until the light began to fade. He ended up in Washington Square Park. The fountain was dry. A man played guitar on a bench. A few people sat on the grass talking quietly. Jackson sat down on a bench at the edge of the park. He watched the man play. The song was slow and sad. The man's voice was rough. No one was really listening. But the man kept playing anyway. Jackson thought about why people make music, why they keep making it even when no one listens, even when no one cares. He thought about the need to say something true, to put a feeling into words and melody, to send it out into the world and hope it finds someone who needs it. He did not have a label, he did not have a manager, he did not have a plan. But he had his songs. He had his voice. He had the belief that if he stayed true to what he heard inside himself, someone would listen. Someone would care. Someone would feel what he felt. It took time. Longer than he thought it would. He played small rooms. He opened for other artists. He wrote songs in the margins of notebooks and on the backs of receipts. He slept on floors. He borrowed money. He doubted himself. But he did not stop. He moved back to Los Angeles. The city felt different than it had before. It felt like home, but also like a place where he did not quite fit. He played the Troubadour. He played McCabe's Guitar Shop. He played anywhere that would have him. Sometimes 20 people came, sometimes 5. Sometimes he played to bartenders and empty chairs. But slowly, something started to happen. People began to remember his name. They began to request his songs. A woman came up to him after a show and said his music had helped her through a divorce. A man said a song had reminded him of his brother who had died. These moments were small, but they were real. They were the reason he had walked away from Grossman. They were the reason he had torn up the contract. One night, in a club on the Sunset Strip, he played a song called Doctor My Eyes. The room was half empty. The sound system was bad. But something in the song cut through. A man in the audience came up to him afterward. He said he worked for Asylum Records. He said he wanted to talk. Jackson was cautious this time. He did not rush. He did not sign anything right away. He asked questions. He read the contract carefully. He made sure the terms were fair. He made sure he kept control of his songs. He made sure the people at the label cared about the music first, not just the money, not just the image, the music. He signed with Asylum. The label was small but honest. The people there believed in letting artists be artists. They believed in taking risks. They believed in songs that mattered. Doctor My Eyes became a hit. Not a huge hit, but big enough. Big enough that people started paying attention. Big enough that radio stations played it. Big enough that Jackson's name started to mean something. His first album came out in 1972. It was called Jackson Browne. It was honest and raw and full of the kind of truth he had been afraid to lose. The songs were his. The sound was his. The choices were his. People listened. People cared. The album did not just sell. It connected. It reached people in the dark. It made them feel less alone. The reviews were good. Some called him the voice of a generation. Some said his songs captured something essential about being young and lost and searching. He did not know if that was true. He just knew he had told the truth as he understood it. He had not tried to be anything other than himself. Years passed. He made more albums. Late for the Sky, The Pretender, Running on Empty. Each one carried grief and hope in equal measure. Each one was a window into his life, into his heart. He wrote about love and loss, about loneliness and connection, about the struggle to stay honest in a world that rewards performance. He became successful, not in the way that brings limousines and mansions, but in the way that matters. His songs lasted. They stayed with people. They became part of people's lives, part of their memories, part of the soundtrack to their own stories. Years later, someone asked him about the contract he had torn up, about the deal with Grossman, about the choice he had made. Jackson did not talk about it often. He did not like to relive it. But he said this, "I didn't know if it was the right decision. I just knew it was the only one I could live with." He said, "You can't make music if you don't own yourself. You can't tell the truth if someone else is holding the pen. He said, I was scared. I thought I was giving up my only shot, but I wasn't. I was protecting it. He said, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what everyone else wants you to want. The room where he signed that contract is gone now. The building has changed hands. Grossman died in 1986. Bearsville Records faded. Dylan moved on. The band broke up, the world kept turning. But the songs Jackson wrote stayed. They stayed because they were his. They stayed because they were true. They stayed because he had been willing to walk away from a deal that would have made them something else. There is no monument to that moment, no plaque on the wall, no documentary that lingers on the folding chair or the gray windows or the torn contract in the wastebasket. But the moment mattered. It mattered because it was a choice made in fear and faith. It mattered because it was a young man deciding that his voice was worth protecting, even when no one knew his name. Jackson Browne went on to write some of the most enduring songs of his generation, songs that did not preach, songs that simply told the truth, songs that held space for sadness without offering easy answers. Songs that understood that life is complicated and beautiful and hard all at once. He did not become famous because he signed with Grossman. He became an artist because he walked away. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the city is still and the streets are empty, you can almost hear it. The sound of paper tearing. The sound of a door closing. The sound of a young man walking out into the cold with nothing but his songs and his name, and the belief that it was enough. It was